In September of 2025, a new entry in the Danganronpa series was revealed in a Nintendo Direct, with a release in the following year. Titled 2x2, the game at first seems like a simple remake of the second game of the series, with enhanced graphics. However, while a retelling of the original story is present in the game, it also contains an entirely new scenario, keeping the same cast as the original, but changing some events leading to new cases, with new murders, and most importantly, new victims, new killers, and a different group of survivors at the end. This news completely took the fandom by storm. Not only was this the first Danganronpa game to be released in the last 5 years, 9 if you only include mainline titles, but the fact that a new storyline was added turned this simple remake into an entirely new game, and fans were ready to embrace it like they did with the previous 3 games. And one of the most popular ways to express this excitement is, of course, to share their own predictions of the events. What would be the new event that caused this change? What would be the new murders? And of course, who would die and in what order? And while it is interesting to see everyone's theories on the matter, I had a different way of seeing this predicament. Because, you see, this game, which takes a pre-existing story in the Danganronpa timeline and changes its outcome, does something very similar to a small project I did during my last year of high school. Only, I didn't have a game in mind, no. Instead, I was aiming higher. So, during my senior year, I turned Danganronpa into a TV show adaptation. So, to give you a quick explanation on what all this was, we need to go back to my high school years. During the summer before my senior year, I became suddenly curious about a little visual novel game called Danganronpa. I heard about it from a couple of YouTubers I watched, but never really knew much about it. So, after hearing much praise about it, I decided to check it out for myself, and I instantly loved it. The atmosphere, the story, the mysteries of the murders and the school itself, and of course, this cast of unforgettable characters. I was hooked. And so, after finishing it, I thought to myself, this needs to be a TV show. At that time, I was particularly interested in film adaptations of video games, and I enjoyed figuring out how some of my favorite games could be turned into movies. Now, this was before the release of films like the Sonic Trilogy, the Illumination Mario movie, or Detective Pikachu. So the general quality of video game movies at that time was, not the best to say the least. So, my aim with these scenarios was to try and come up with ways to honor those games and their stories on the big screen, respecting the original material while making newcomers care about these characters. And with this idea in mind, as soon as I finished Danganronpa, I knew it was the perfect fit. Being a story-driven game, it lends itself nicely to a film format, and the school setting was one easily accessible to me since I was in high school myself. And so, I decided to take on the challenge, not just to think of how to adapt it, but to literally write the script myself throughout the year. My original plan was to film it the following summer with some friends of mine at our high school, a way to conclude our school journey together and have fun before starting college. Unfortunately, I never got the filming rights to film at our high school. I guess public schools aren't really keen on the idea of allowing their buildings to be used for a story about students murdering each other. Who would have thought? So, this project of mine went dormant, occasionally resurfacing in my mind so I could polish and alter a couple of things, waiting only to be able to see the light of day and be shared with the world. Until now. This series of videos is thus an explanation on that script I wrote, updated to its latest version as of writing this. I may change it slightly afterwards, but I think I was able to get it to a point where I'm pretty satisfied with the end result. Now, while I would love to go into detail on how I would direct such a project, I'm only going to be focusing on the screenplay aspect of the project, mainly because A, that's the one aspect that I have been able to work on so far, and B, I could easily go way too far into explaining every aspect of that show. Maybe I could do it for another video, but for now, I'd rather stick with what I already worked on. As for how I present all of this to you, I'll start with a simple explanation on the general structure of my show, before going into a bit more detail with each chapter of a game and how I would adapt it. I will be mostly discussing on the aspect I changed from the original story, while simply skimming over what would stay the same, as to not bore the average fan of the game. I'll also try to explain the reason as to why I made those changes, as it may give you a better idea of my thought process. But, before we begin, I need to lay down a couple of warnings for you. Despite my channel having me act out in many different scenarios, including from this very series, I'm not a professional filmmaker, nor am I a professional screenwriter. True, I would love to be one, but I'd be lying if I said I had any experience on that. So keep that in mind while watching, as I am just a simple fan trying to retell the story in my own way. And of course, I will be giving out massive spoilers, not only to the original game and some of its sequels, but also to my own version. Why am I specifying my version? Because if, in the not-so-distant future, that passion project becomes more concrete, then this video would risk spoiling the entire thing. So yeah, I'd prefer just to put a spoiler warning just in case. But, with that being said, let's get started with how this show is organized. The first thing you might be asking yourself is, why make it a show and not a movie? Well, the simple answer is that Danganronpa's story works much better as a show than as a movie. While movies nowadays can range to be over 3 hours long, they still have a rather limited amount of time. Time that doesn't allow for multiple murder cases and massive character development, two elements that are essential in the story. Sure, Danganronpa isn't a particularly long game, but even that length would be challenging to properly adapt in a 2 to 3 hour story. If it did, it would have to be massively shortened like how they do it in the play adaptation. In contrast, a show and its multiple episodes gives much more time to present these different cases and fully develop the main cast. That's why I ultimately decided on a TV show format for the story. But how exactly does the story fit in the TV format? For the general structure of a show, I imagine it to be a standard 13-episode season, with each episode lasting for about an hour. This should give enough time to tell the story, while also giving each key moment its time to breathe without rushing things. As for what each episode contains, the first episode would include the prologue of a game, in order to introduce the characters, the setting, and the main plot of a game. The following episodes would cover the main chapters of a game, with each chapter being covered in 2 episodes. So, episodes 2 and 3 would cover chapter 1, episodes 4 and 5 chapter 2, etc. The first of these groups of episodes would cover the daily life and the investigation segments, while the second would cover the class trial. I'm also open to restructuring these layouts so that each episode is more or less equivalent in length, but for now, I think that's a decent way to divide them. But structure is one thing. How do we tell the events of this show? Now, my goal here is to be mostly faithful to the original game. If this is supposed to be an adaptation of the original game, then it's best to have it as closely as possible to it. As such, the main story of a game, the characters' different personalities, and the multiple plot twists surrounding them, and the story, are the same from the original story. But, as an adaptation, it's also important to change some elements in order to make the story flow more smoothly. In that regards, I decided to exclude 2 aspects of a game. The first is the free time events. Well, yes, those moments are a nice way to get to know each character and to make them more three-dimensional. They're also optional and don't alter the story itself, so they can be easily skipped. And the second is Hangman's Gambit, one of the minigames played during the class trials. While for the others, I do have some good ideas on how to adapt them while making the show more visually interesting, which I may go over some other time, Hangman's Gambit isn't particularly vital to the flow of the class trial. Dare I say, it kinda makes it drag for much longer than it needs to. So, because of that, I decided to remove it from my version. Both of these changes, as well as some smoothness in the dialogue, would definitely help to reduce the length of the story in order to meet with what is available. But even with those changes, you may think that this adaptation would just be a straight retelling of the original game, with no major changes made. In a way, it would be a live-action version of the anime with a bigger runtime. But doing this leads to another problem. How do we surprise fans of the original game? You see, the big strength of mystery stories is, well, the mystery itself. Some of the best of this genre make the viewers try to guess who the culprit is alongside the characters in the story, making the final reveal all the more satisfying if they got it right. Of course, that is one of the strengths of Danganronpa, which is only made stronger by the fact that we are controlling one of those characters. However, it also has the strengths of thrillers, in that it always makes us guess what is going to happen next. Specifically, it makes us guess on who will die next, and Danganronpa is especially good at making us think that a character will make it through, only to cut their lives short at the next moment. It's that element of surprise that makes Danganronpa, well, Danganronpa. But if you set out to adapt the story, keeping every element the same, including who dies and at what moment, that element of surprise is gone, since anyone who is already familiar with the story will already know the fate of his characters. That's why I believe the anime adaptation to be a bit inferior to the game, because not only does it rush through the story, but it also just retells it without any major deviation. Sure, new fans can still enjoy it, but old fans might be bored by it. So, to avoid this problem, I decided to only make one major change. Sure, I mentioned how the main story, the characters themselves, and the plot twist will be the same, but I never said that the character's fate would be the same, did I? This is why I started with a comparison to 2x2. Indeed, like that game will do, I'm taking the same characters and setting and switching things up a bit by changing victims, killers, and survivors. That way, the story would be different enough to surprise even the most hardcore of fans. But there's a catch to that as well, as if I change too much of it, then this story will diverge from an adaptation into full fanfiction, which isn't really what we want here. Because of this, we need to set some ground rules. First, the victims and killers of each case might be different, but the way people are murdered should stay the same. This allows the original story to still be majorly present, as each case will still be similar enough to its game counterpart, rather than just doing a new one from the ground up. And second, we need a limit to the number of characters who are having their fates change. We need enough to make the story our own, but not too much in order to avoid deviating completely from the original story. With that being said, I decided that of the 15 characters from the game, 16 if you include Mukuro, I would only change the fate of 5 of them. That is about a third of the cast, meaning the majority will have the same story as before, but enough will be different that the final outcome could be largely different from the game. That way, the main story can still have its moment to shine, and both new and old fans can enjoy the story and get legitimately surprised at times. Sure, it's not a completely new scenario, like what 2x2 is setting up to be, but it's still different enough that it could still stand on its own. Of course, this much change will still require changing the cases a little bit, just enough so that it makes sense for the characters present. Of course, I'll go more in detail later, but for now, you may be wondering, how do we decide which characters are changing? Well, I do have a solution to that. You see, we can separate the characters into 3 distinct categories. The victims, aka the ones who are murdered by a fellow classmate and are the subject of the case. The blackened, or killers, the ones who commit murder only to be found out during a class trial and subsequently executed. And the survivors, those who stay in the game until the very end and are eventually able to escape the school. With these categories in mind, my proposition is to select a couple of characters from each category and switch them to another one. But to what category? Well, starting with the victims, while you could argue that some could potentially become killers, especially given how they act, I prefer to actually give them a second chance. After all, these guys had their lives cut short in a cruel game, so I believe it would be best to change them into survivors instead. For the killers, we could also give them a second chance, but unlike the victims, these guys went out of their way to murder one of their own. So I'm not so keen on letting them go scot-free. Which is why I believe it's best if they become new victims instead. As for the survivors, they could go either way, since no matter what, the changes we make would result in their deaths. So the survivors can become either victims or killers. With that being said, here's what I came up with. 2 victims of a game would become survivors. 2 survivors would end up dead, one as a killer, the other as a victim, and 1 killer would end up being a victim. That way, every role is filled, and the 5 characters that we need to change are selected in a generally balanced way. Sure, you may think the killers are at a disadvantage since only 1 is changed, but considering they're the smallest group in terms of members, I think it's only fair. Now, while this is all well and good, one question still remains. Who do we change? In selecting the characters who would have an altered fate, I analyzed every character using 3 criteria: their relevance to the plot, the possibility for them to grow, and their overall popularity within the fandom. As such, the victims I chose to survive are generally those who can have a bigger impact on the plot, who have a possibility to learn from their experience during the game, and that are generally pretty well liked within the community. In contrast, the survivors I chose to die would be those that don't contribute much, stay stagnant throughout the story, and are generally disliked among fans. As for killers, considering they would still die no matter what, it may be good to take one that might not be the most popular, but still shows potential in order to flesh them out more. Now, I'll discuss more in depth on which characters I ultimately choose as we go through each chapter. I will also go into detail as to why the characters I change fit into their new roles, and I will also argue how giving them a different role may not work as well for them. But for now, let's begin looking at each chapter in more detail, starting with where it all begins. The prologue itself would play out just like in the game. Makoto Naegi is enrolled at Hope Speak Academy as the ultimate lucky student. When he first enters the school, he suddenly feels dizzy and loses consciousness. When he wakes up, he finds the school is closed shut, with the windows being covered by metal plates, and with security cameras everywhere. He eventually meets the rest of his class, all of whom have an ultimate talent, a field in which they are the very best at. These classmates are the ultimate moral compass, Kiyotaka Taka Ishimaru, the ultimate writing prodigy, Toko Fukawa, the ultimate pop sensation, Sayaka Maizono, the ultimate baseball star, Leon Kuwata, the ultimate fanfic writer, Hifumi Yamada, the ultimate swimming pro, Aoi Hina Asahina, the ultimate programmer, Chihiro Fujisaki, the ultimate something, Kyoko Kirigiri, the ultimate fashionista, Junko Enoshima, the ultimate biker gang leader, Mondo Owada, the ultimate martial artist, Sakura Ogami, the ultimate affluent progeny, Byakuya Togami, the ultimate clairvoyant, Yasuhiro Hiro Hagakure, and the ultimate gambler, Celestia Celeste Ludenberg. As he gets familiar with them, they are suddenly called to the gym where they meet their headmaster, a robotic monochrome bear named Monokuma. He tells the students that they are to live a communal life here in the school, forced to live the rest of their days here. But if they wish to leave, all they must do is kill one of their fellow classmates. The students, shocked by this revelation, are left to doubt and fear each other, thus beginning the killing school life. As said before, this first part can easily play out like in the game, without any major change. It's really there in order to introduce the characters and understand the setting and main plot. The only aspect that could possibly be altered is the dialogue itself, in order for the different conversations between the students to flow more naturally, and possibly also hinting at a couple of relationships and revelations that will come up later during the story. It's also important that Makoto gets to talk with every other character, thus meeting them and getting an early impression of them as he does. While I'm still pretty open on the order in which the characters should introduce themselves to him, the one I will definitely keep for last is Sayaka. She and Makoto came from the same middle school, so it's important to have her as the last one so that Makoto can end with someone he is already familiar with. That, and it will also allow to set the scene for Sayaka's role in the following chapter. Other than those elements, the prologue can easily stay the same as the game. So now that the stage is set and the characters are presented, let's dive right into the beginning of this killing game. For their daily life, the chapter goes as it originally did in the game. The students, played by Taka, first get familiar to their surroundings. Right now, the only places that are available to them are the dorms and the first floor of the main building, and there seems to be no way of escaping. In parallel, we also see some students starting to get along with one another, like Hina and Sakura, and especially Makoto and Sayaka. These two seem to always be together and are able to get pretty close with one another. Sayaka even shares her wishes and dreams to Makoto, reinforcing that she desperately wants to get out, but Makoto is here to help her. As the days go by, Monokuma grows tired of the lack of killing and decides to give the students a motive: personal videos of their close ones mysteriously disappearing, thus giving them reason to try and leave to see if they're alright. While the students start getting anxious, Sayaka in particular seems terrified of that, but Makoto is able to reassure her once again. That night, however, Sayaka goes to see him, telling him she heard a noise from her hallway. Fearing for her safety, they decide to switch rooms overnight, promising to not open their doors to anyone. But as Makoto wakes up the next morning, he finds his room ransacked and Sayaka dead in the bathroom. As the students gather, Monokuma explains to them the rules of a class trial. After an investigation, the class trial will begin, where every student will need to decide on who the killer is, using the evidence they found during the investigation. If the majority vote for a real killer, then they alone will be executed. But if the students make the wrong choice, everyone else will be punished and the blackened will get to leave the academy. While the students are terrified of that, Junko seems more on edge, defying Monokuma's order and attacks him. However, doing that violates one of her rules, and she gets executed on the spot because of that. The rest of her surviving students are thus confronted with having to figure out who killed Sayaka. After the investigation, the class trial begins. While initial suspicion is placed on Makoto due to the fact that the murder took place in his room, he's able to prove his innocence, explaining how he wouldn't have teared off the knob of his bathroom door, as he knew that it wasn't framed right, and he wouldn't have used the lint roller to remove his hair, as it would be normal to find his hair in his room. However, he comes to the realization that Sayaka herself was the one who tried to commit murder. She was the one to get the knife from the kitchen, and Kyoko even found a message telling someone to meet her in her room, even having switched the nameplates on hers and Makoto's room. While Makoto is shocked at that, he continues to try and solve his case, understanding that whoever she wrote to is the killer. After much reflection, he finds out that Sayaka's killer was none other than Yasuhiro Hagakure. So yeah, right off the first chapter, the killer is different, having gone from Leon in the game to Hiro in the show. But how exactly do we go about adapting the case in order for Hiro to make sense as the killer? First off, let's get something clear. Could Sayaka have lured Hiro to the room to try and kill him? Well, technically, yes she could. She could easily address the message to Hiro instead of Leon and slip it into Hiro's room. As to why Hiro specifically, she could easily have seen that he wasn't really the smartest guy around, which is definitely a very prominent character trait of his. Heck, up to this point, he didn't even understand that the killing game was real, so in her eyes, he would be an easy target. As for if Hiro could overpower her despite that simple-mindedness, I believe he could. His 180 centimeters to her 165 definitely gives him the height advantage, and his easily panicked personality could make him fearful of Sayaka, leading to him defending himself. Heck, he already did something like that in the game in Chapter 4 when he attacked Sakura, trying to kill her when he thought she would kill him. Sure, he didn't succeed at that, but there clearly was an attempt, so Hiro isn't really one to let himself get killed. So the initial struggle can happen like in the game, and Hiro could also try to get the bathroom door open with his toolkit to kill Sayaka, just like what Leon did in the game. And the toolkit being the deciding evidence for his murder can also stay, since it would work just as well as in the game. And since only the boys got toolkits, Hiro should definitely have his own as well. However, there are still two pieces of evidence that need to be changed in order for Hiro being the killer to be believable. First is of course Sayaka's dying message. In the game, it was entailed as a way to frame Leon, as Sayaka wanted to warn the others and protect Makoto. However, since Leon is innocent in this scenario, the message needs to be different. Which is why, unfortunately, we need to get rid of 11037. I know, it's a popular meme in the fandom, but in order for our scenario to work, it needs to go. Fortunately, I have found the perfect replacement. Say hello to 06111. Okay, so maybe it's not the best of messages, and Sayaka's handwriting can seriously be put into question, but it would still act and serve the same function as its original counterpart. And since it doesn't use simple letters, it might also be a bit more challenging to figure out for viewers. As for the next piece of evidence to be changed, we have the broken crystal ball. In the game, Leon uses it in order to hit the incinerator and discard his bloody shirt, only leaving a small piece behind, which is then used to incriminate him. Now, the shirt itself is not a problem, since Hiro does have a similar shirt. The real problem is the broken crystal ball itself, as A, Hiro is not the ultimate baseball star and thus wouldn't be able to hit the incinerator button to activate it with the ball, and B, that's his crystal ball that he paid a fortune for. There's no way he would waste it on this. So clearly, we need another solution. I admit I did have some trouble with this point, but I did come up with something that could work. At this point in time, the students should have access to the laundry room, which, as we can see in the game, contains some clotheslines. It's difficult to tell what their material is, but for our scenario, we could say that they're made of steel or a whitish metal, thus less flexible but more solid. So Hiro could just grab one of those lines and use it to both activate the incinerator and drop his shirt inside, thus allowing that piece of evidence to be found. And it also helps that Hiro should be tall enough to reach the lines, and the length should be enough to reach the incinerator button. As for why the incinerator should stay on after burning the evidence, we can say that Hiro dropped the line accidentally behind the fence, making it impossible for him to get it back without the key. But since the evidence was discarded, he didn't think that would be a problem. Sure, that may seem stupid, but remember, Hiro is stupid. I mean, he's the guy who thought a classmate who was standing right next to him was dead, and who thought that someone who, from what he knew, died instantly would clearly have the time to write a dying message. So clearly, not the brightest around, and this demeanor could definitely feel in character. With that, the characters can find the line of the garbage room and notice that some clothes seem out of place in the laundry room, either with the remaining lines being too crowded, or that they're just lying on the floor. These evidences, plus the aforementioned burned shirt and Hiro's used toolkit, should be enough to prove his guilt, thus having him be voted as the culprit. But we're also forgetting one thing. After all, the culprit of each case receives their own execution, one tailor-made for them reflecting on their talent. And it's safe to say that Leon's execution, the 1,000 blows, doesn't really fit with Hiro. Fortunately, the Danganronpa visual fanbook actually gives a description of potential executions for every character that didn't have one in the game. Thus, we can simply adapt Hiro's execution, quiz time I heard there's a chance of 30%, and solve the problem of the execution. Sure, that execution is a bit weird, but it definitely fits with Hiro's own personality. We can also have him mention his 30% prediction rate before, so that the audience better understands the reference. So this all explains how we can change the first case to have Hiro as the killer. But the question is, why make this change in the first place? But before that, let's look at one particular character who, unlike most others, absolutely cannot change. Makoto has a very good reason as to why he shouldn't change. That reason being, he's the protagonist. He's the character the player controls throughout the game, and being the most normal person in the group, he serves as the audience surrogate, the one the average viewer can relate to the most and experience the events from his point of view. Killing him off would completely change the story, which is not what we want to do. And yes, Danganronpa V3 did this exact twist, but this only worked because of how the game presents the murder, and from the fact that Kaede, the first protagonist from that game, clearly wanted to put an end to the killing game as fast as possible, going so far as killing the mastermind if she needed to. But Makoto is not like that. He's the type of person who would find the best in everyone, and who would rather unite everyone against the mastermind instead of doing things on his own. Heck, he even tries to dissuade Junko from killing herself. You know, the person who put them through hell and the only one he genuinely hates? So no, Makoto would never try to kill someone. But what about being a victim? Well, that wouldn't work either, because he's usually one to stay in his room during nighttime, making it difficult to kill him then. And his friendly and sociable nature means that he probably wouldn't be the target of a murder plot. Yeah, he might be a pain during class trials, but he's also way too nice. Who'd want to kill him? So yeah, it's pretty obvious that Makoto needs to survive this. Not only does his role as the protagonist mean that he's essential to the story, but his general personality means that it would be difficult for him to die in the first place. Because of that, Makoto is staying as a survivor. I'd also like to take this moment to talk about a way in which I'd like to shine light on the surviving cast of this scenario. Indeed, my goal is to have each one get major development and have a particular growing moment in one particular chapter. This would help the audience to care much more for a surviving cast, and thus become more satisfied when they're able to leave. Makoto is thus the focal survivor of this first chapter, and through Sayaka's death, he can grow and try to help the others in order to make sure nothing like that ever happens again. In a way, I see Makoto as the heart of the class, the glue that keeps the students all together and unites them against the mastermind, which is why I intend for him to get much closer to each remaining survivor at the end of their central chapter. For this, I'm imagining scenes where he, as well as some other students, if appropriate, would comfort these survivors, which would inspire them to grow and learn from their experience. The conversation he has with Kyoko at the end of this chapter can also serve as a hint of what he would do next, maybe without even realizing it. But for now, Makoto is the only one who grows, deciding to move forward while remembering those who died. As such, Makoto is set up to be the anchor of everyone's development, the one who helps the others to grow into their better versions of themselves. So that explains why Makoto has to stay alive. But what about the victim of this case? Why must she stay the same as well? At first glance, you might think that Sayaka could benefit greatly from surviving longer. I mean, she's the first victim, the first to die. Surely there's more that could be done with her character. Plus, while not the most popular character in the cast, she still has a decent number of fans, some of whom might be a bit too passionate about her. While it is true that her time was cut short, I decided to keep her as the first victim because of the emotional impact she brings. Remember, the protagonist of the story is Makoto, and since Sayaka is the first person he gets close to, it creates a stronger bond between them, and thus creates a stronger bond between the audience and Sayaka. We get to know her better than anyone else, we get to see her insecurities better, which only makes us get more attached to her, and this stronger attachment only makes her death hit so much harder. The one character we spend the most time with is now dead. Of course it will hit harder. And it also helps develop Makoto himself, as this case feels much more personal to him now. And with the revelation that she was the one who tried to commit murder, both Makoto and the audience feel a bigger sense of betrayal from her. A character we thought we could trust tried to kill someone else and blame the protagonist for it. This first death and revelation are the reason why this first chapter works so well, showing that anyone could break and try to get out. It's for that reason that I feel that Sayaka should stay as the first victim, in order to prepare the viewer to what will happen next. So, if we're keeping the victim the same, why change the killer? Well, for this case, the change of killer can be pretty simple, as all Sayaka has to do is call someone other than Leon to her room, so a similar scenario can happen just with another character instead of Leon. But then, why Hiro? Why choose him? After all, in the original timeline, he survived the killing game. True, but even among just the survivors, Hiro just makes the most sense to go after. Makoto is obviously out of the question since Sayaka is putting the blame on him. She probably wouldn't go for a girl since not as easily persuaded, and Byakuya is much too smart to fall for such a ruse. With that in mind, Hiro is the ideal candidate. But there's also one specific reason why he should be the one to go instead of any other survivor. Because, out of all the survivors, Hiro's the one who contributes the least to the plot. Sure, he has an arc of sorts about getting more confident, but when it comes to the class trials or the investigations, he's pretty much useless. Worse, at times, his stupidity can make the case drag for much longer than needed, which can easily irritate some viewers. It also doesn't help that Hiro is far from the most popular character out there, and you usually see him among the least popular of his cast. So I don't really think there will be much riot if we decide to kill him off early. But then, why as a killer? Why not as a victim? While yes, it would be a nice callback at how he is the victim in the game's demo, I think making him a killer would be more interesting, not only as a reversal of that callback, but also to show that a seemingly easy target could very well get his hands dirty. And remember, he did try to kill someone in the game, and even thought he did for a time. So this doesn't really feel out of character for him. And as such, we're able to keep the strength of Sayaka's first death, while also killing off a survivor who doesn't impact the story all that much. So that's why Hiro is the first character to change. His lack of importance and his general unpopularity make him the best fit for kicking the bucket in our scenario. And with this death, even hardcore fans of a game would feel surprised and unsure of what would happen next. So this concludes this first chapter, with one character who's already met an unexpected end. But how will this affect the rest of the story? Well, for that, we must look at the next chapter.